So, welcome to Playing the Culture Game. In this series, we dive deep into interesting people and culture topics with very interesting guests, all whilst playing a game of some sorts. And today's very interesting guest is Steph Clarke, my very good friend and learning extraordinaire. Steph is someone who loves to reimagine learning experiences with organisations, very passionate about learning, an amazing facilitator, creative person, does lots and lots of cool things, and also runs her own podcast as well, Steph's Business Bookshelf, and amongst many, many other things, which I'm sure some of these things will crop up during the session today. And today we are going to be talking about curating the learning experience, all whilst playing the game of Scrabble. Hey, Steph, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm glad we're just about to record the end of our friendship on on us playing a game, because I must say, I didn't tell you this when you asked me to come on here, but I do have several friends who I cannot play games with or board games with and stuff like that anymore. So.
Is that because of you or is that because of them?
Look, it may or may not be because of me. So.
So are you saying this is a test for me? I need the way I behave.
This is a test. So I think if we're still going to go for dinner next week at the end of this, like, we're doing okay. We've done all right.
Okay. I'll try my best to be a friendly game player. I am very, very competitive. I've found in this series I'm not so competitive, but we never know. The competitive beast might.
Well, but the two of us together, maybe it's just like it'll be some kind of like nuclear reaction. We'll just...
Are you crazy competitive as well, especially about Scrabble?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, this is going to be juicy then.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm kind of regretting playing Scrabble against you. I mean, you read so many books. I'm assuming the vocab and the knowledge of words is through the roof for you.
I don't know about that. I think it's well, yes, maybe, but also not when you've been given 7 weird random letters. I mean, that's a bit of a different thing. So
yes, it is.
We'll see.
We're gonna see. I'm looking forward to the conversation and the game of Scrabble now. In particular, now I'm looking forward to evaluation of me as a person.
Yes, although I have just seen you multitasking, so I do know that if I just distract you very slightly, then I think I'm not that I want to do like dirty tricks or anything, but
that is I think that's a good trick. I think that's within the sphere of good tactics.
I think so. Look over there.
I play online sometimes. I'm playing 1v1 games, and there is one friend in particular that leverages that a lot. As soon as they're losing, they'll just start asking interesting questions all of a sudden. Questions they've never asked me before. It's like, I know what you're doing here. It works though. So
yeah, nice.
So great to have you on. I'm really looking forward to the game and the chat. But before we kind of get into that, just a couple of things for the audience to get a bit of insights about you. And I love the first question I like starting off with is just, can you share with us just a personal highlight you've had? And it can be from the space of work, personally, anything at all, really. Just something that you could talk to as a highlight.
Well, the first one that sprung to mind was just this long weekend or extra long weekend we've just had, or certainly at the time of recording this, which I think is a couple of weeks before it goes out, went for a big hike with a couple of friends, and it was my first multi-day overnight. I've done one night 2 days before, but it was the most walking or hiking I've done in one day times 3, if that makes sense. So the longest days I've done and the longest days together I've done. So it was just like a really good, well, number one, it's just great to be out living again and feeling like we're doing good things as we should or could be doing. But also just that kind of, when you actually set your mind to something, you can do things that you maybe thought were going to be harder than they actually were.
Yeah, amazing. So sounds like there's a couple of things there for you. You got out and about again, reconnecting with nature, walking, but there's also a bit of a milestone in terms of tackling a challenge of something you haven't done before. Tell me a little bit about that last one then. So what's the preparation that goes into these multi-day hikes? How do you even know that you can do it? Is there much, do you get to points where you're like, I have to really persevere through this? Tell me about that kind of mental challenge and preparation.
Yeah, the mental bit wasn't too bad for this one, actually, although on halfway through the second day, which was the first 2 days were the longest days, and the day 3 was actually a fairly bit shorter. But halfway through the second day, a couple of things were starting to hurt, and I thought, am I going to get through this? And I thought, I've got enough painkillers. So it's just painkillers and meals. That's what I was, and snacks. That's what was getting me through. But just that realization that, look, if I'm with these two people who are great human beings, then I think we're just going to be fine. And there's always sometimes knowing there's an out, like knowing that you can there's ways of being able to get out of the situation as well, for me is quite important. And then thinking, oh, well, if I can always get out of this, then I'll always be fine. And I think that's also the thing I apply quite a lot to my life decisions as well. Like most things are get outable. There's a couple of things that aren't, but really pretty much everything else is. So I always kind of have that in the back of my mind as well. And if you know there's an out, then, you know, you can take kind of bigger risks and stuff, I think.
That's a cool way of looking at it. As long as you've got some element of kind of choice and control, and you know that at any point you can just press the eject button and you're out of a situation. It's saying most situations that applies to.
Yeah.
You can start taking bigger risks, you know, as long as you know what the, you know, where the fire escape is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You can jump in.
Yeah. And I think as well for this one, it was just super muddy as well. So I think the mental bit was knowing that I was going to have wet socks and wet boots for the 3 days, because day one, super muddy. We just got absolutely soaked. And even with proper hiking boots and stuff, you know, it's not, we weren't rocking up in runners or anything like that. We, you know, had all the gear. And even with proper walking boots and stuff, knowing that those were not going to be drying in for the whole 3 days, and being like, okay, it's that kind of discomfort you've got to kind of work around and just think, right, how do I maintain some level of reasonable comfort, but also just get over the fact that is just how it's going to be, and you just can't control that.
You can't change it. You know, this is you've got wet socks, so you just got to deal with it. And it's not nice, and wet boots. You're better than me. I just went for a run the other day. We were in New Zealand. Bridge took me this lovely run along the coast, but I'm just used to running on pavement and concrete, and we had to go through this muddy thing. And I actually literally stopped running way shorter than I was meant to because I had wet socks. It's like, I was like, I refuse to run in wet socks. So you're stronger than me. Well,
there we go. But I am going to lose 3 toenails as a result. So maybe you made the sensible decision, to be honest.
I've got a perfect set of toenails intact.
Exactly. You've got 10 toenails. So.
Yeah, 10. Yeah. Okay, it's got 10. Yeah. Awesome. And have you got another hike planned? Are you the sort of person that does one and you're like, next one is on the radar now? Or
yeah, we've got a couple in mind. One of the friends I'm going with is being quite the overachiever and is going in a few weeks to hike from the top of New Zealand to the bottom of New Zealand, which is going to take her 4 months. So I'm planning to go over and try and do, so I want to go and try and work it. So I go and do a stint with her, probably just a couple of days, like a long weekend type thing during the time she's away. And so that, and then with the other friend who's staying here, we'll probably do some stuff over the summer as well.
I'm just still getting over the top of New Zealand. That is a wild thing to just go, hey, that's what I want to do.
Yeah. She's pretty amazing. She did Larapinta a couple of months, about a month ago actually as well, which was like the warm up, which is what most people's kind of like pinnacle of their hiking is. That was her warm up for going and doing the whole of New Zealand.
Oh, that's cool. And so you say you're going to be joining at some point?
That's the plan. Yeah, we're trying to work out logistics and stuff at the moment, but yeah, hopefully.
How cool would that be? Just jumping in part of the journey and then...
Yeah. And that's the cool thing actually about it being only in New Zealand, that if she went and did the sort of Pacific Trail or something like that in the US, it's kind of harder to make that work. But with New Zealand, you can just kind of hop over and be a little bit more flexible with it.
That's amazing. Oh, very cool. Great work of getting out there, doing something totally different and new, doing a multi-day hike, which is, I think, and it sounds like you did it with friends and it was fun.
Yeah, it was awesome.
It sounded awesome. That's super. Now, Steph, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over to a game called Quinks, and I'm going to draw another question to get you to know you a little bit more. The key here is I'm going to draw a question. You may love the question, you may hate the question. If you don't like it, we can redraw it until we find something you like. And so the first question I have got for you is, what would you like to be known for in the context of friends, family, and relationships?
I assume it shouldn't be hyper-competitiveness, given we've just discussed that.
If that's what you want to be known for.
Probably not. So, I don't know, the first thing other than the competitiveness that came to mind was the person who brings the people together and has the hub, whether that's the kind of physical place or I guess kind of metaphorical even, that is the kind of connecting thing. Yeah. And I think in some of my friendship groups that kind of is the case already, and I'd love for that to kind of be a little bit more tangible now that we can kind of get together a bit more and all of those types of good things, especially here in Victoria. So yeah, just thinking about what could that be over time as we potentially move or live somewhere different or whatever, and having that kind of that gathering space, that gathering place, and being the person who's like, hey, these people, bring them together, like have a great meal, have some good conversation, go for a hike, whatever it is that actually is the connecting glue that is pulls people together.
That's awesome. And why is that something you like focusing in on? What is it about bringing people together that gives you a spark?
Yeah, I think it's inherently, I like people on the most part. Like sometimes, I mean, there's some exceptions, of course. Just going to put it out there. But hopefully that's not the next question. Who are those exceptions? Oh, well, there's this person. No, but I've always liked bringing people together and having and not big things. It doesn't need to be 100 people, 300 people or anything like that. That's less of my jam. But bringing people a kind of big conversation table type thing together. And as kids, we can always have people coming over for various different reasons. And I really wanted to live in that house that is the dropping in house, that people would kind of drop in and be like, oh, hey, I was just passing, and that kind of thing, and be the household that then just always had that kind of open revolving door of friends coming in and out and that type of thing. And never had that as a kid, and have always tried to make that happen then in other places I've lived or whatever as well, and be part of sort of cooking groups or social groups or things where that's a bit more the thing. And even when I went back to the UK this year in May for the first time in 3 years, obviously after not being able to travel for a bit, the thing I did that I had really missed and just had forgotten how great it is those friends that you can go and sit on their sofa and eat biscuits and talk shit for, are we allowed to swear? Sorry.
Yeah. Well,
okay. Talk shit for a couple of hours. Yeah. Couple of hours of an evening. Like that's the stuff I miss, not necessarily scheduling, three dinners, 3 nights in a row, like that type of thing. It's actually the kind of getting together, the real conversations, and getting that little deeper bit of connection as well. And that comes from, I think, having that slightly more home kind of hub for that to happen.
That's very cool. So you mentioned this concept of home hub, like this place where people kind of come to. You also mentioned physical, metaphysical, if that's the right word.
Metaphorical,
yeah. And I guess the question is, what would you like to be known for? And you said you're doing that in some parts, and in some parts you'd like to kind of grow that. If you're kind of going to expand on that concept a little bit more of what the future state looks like, how do you know you kind of got there where it's like, I've got this hub concept?
Yeah. I think the image in my mind is that I have the home, the house that I would love, which is somewhere central enough that people can get to, but not like necessarily like a sort of a CBD kind of thing or anything, that's got and this is not all about the kind of the kind of materialistic kind of element of it, but it's got the table that people come to, and that every other Sunday or something like that, there is a group of 8 people or whatever who turn up. It's not necessarily always the same people. There's kind of a bigger group that then whoever is around that Friday evening or Sunday lunchtime or whatever it is, depending on time of year. Maybe it's a Sunday lunchtime in the winter and a Friday evening in the summer or something like that. That people just know that there'll always be a sort of a seat for them and some food for them and some conversation for them a couple of times, or once a week or once a fortnight or something. And that's the the space I've created physically for that to happen.
Amazing. I love it. I can picture it. I can visualize it. I can see the smile on your face even thinking about it. So it sounds awesome.
There's a seat for you, Viren. There's always a seat for you. So.
I'll be there. I'll be there with a board game in hand.
Your decks. Bring your deck. Bring your decks.
And I'll bring my decks. Yes. Any excuse. Any excuse.
Yeah.
I love it. It sounds really exciting, and I wish you good luck in building that vision and that future as well.
Yeah, and awesome. Even like from a work perspective as well, like I'd love at some point, maybe and it's not necessarily on the short-term list, but actually to have a physical facilitation space which is designed and created where people can come together to have the conversations, to run the things, to whatever it is. And the thing I don't like about that is it's quite a fixed location, whereas I think being able to kind of create that in other places, especially for something like facilitation, is quite is pretty important. But that kind of concept, and whether that's something is more mobile, but you create it in different places, is kind of a cool idea as well.
Imagine you've got like this mobile facilitation room that's going around that you can reconfigure. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Amazing. Great to get some insights about you and your visions going forward. We are going to flip focus to talking a little bit more about curating the learning experience, or what's playing a game of Scrabble. So I think most people will be familiar with old box of Scrabble somewhere and played a game. For those of you that haven't played Scrabble, aim is you get some random tiles, you've got to build some words, and you get points for the words you build. There is a strategic element as well. It's there's special squares on the board, and you get multiple points for certain words that you put on. Aim of the game really is put down words, make points, and try and get more points than the other person. Some people are quite sneaky with Scrabble. I'm not at this level where they put weird 2-letter words down, block parts.
Oh, the 2-letter words, yeah. Those are the, yeah.
If you're good at that, you're going to smash me.
No.
That's good.
I mean, I cannot remember. I could not tell you the last year or the last time or year even I played Scrabble. So,
good.
Yeah.
We're both jumping in.
Be suitably rusty. There's certainly no strategy here anyway.
Rusty Scrabble. This is the name of the game.
Yeah.
The other part of the experience today really is that in the game we'll be donating money to a charity of your choosing, Steph, and we will donate $75 to the charity if you lose, but if you win, we double the donation to $150. So, Steph, tell us a little bit about the charity of your choice for today.
Yep. So I've chosen the Asylum Seekers Resource Centre because I love the work they do. I think it's just such an important organisation. I guess sometimes, in some ways, unfortunately, an important organisation here in Australia that is needed. But the work they do is really important and valuable. And I do 1% for the planet donation, and actually they don't fit into the category for that, so I thought this is a great way of getting a donation to them that I can't normally fit into my normal donation things that I do.
Clever, very nice way of picking a charity, very thoughtful.
So there's some strategy there, even if there isn't in the Scrabble. Yeah.
I know you're a strategic person. I have a feeling you're a strategic person, so whether it applies to Scrabble or not,
we'll see.
You're well intentioned and thought through, so I'm thinking the words are not going to be just random words that you're throwing out onto the board.
We'll see what the tiles give me. So
let's see what the tiles give us. Great little technical glitch setting up. We're all good to go. So the Scrabble's going, and the topic for today is curating a learning experience. So the first question I've got for you, Steph, is there's a million things you particularly could have spoken about, because I think you're very interested in not just the learning side, but redesigning the workplace experience. Why is this the topic you've chosen to talk about today?
I think it's the one that feels most relevant at the moment for a start. It's kind of very, seems to be quite a common conversation I'm having with clients at the moment, in particular around how to rethink curriculums and how to rethink learning, particularly over the last, or coming out of the last couple of years. And I keep kind of be like, the last couple of years, it's getting a bit old now, but it's true. It's still very relevant. And the two conversations I'm having with clients at the moment is either organizations who just don't really have anything in the way of learning, and it's usually once a year some poor person in HR goes, oh God, we haven't run anything for 12 months. Quick, do anything. is one thing. Or people have pulled out their 2019 curriculums, gone, dusted it off and gone, oh God, that doesn't work anymore, particularly with different ways of working and all of the other stuff that kind of goes along with it as well. So, and I think curation is a really important part of sort of future of work type learning, modern learning, whatever kind of buzzwords you want to put around it, because there's so much good stuff out there. And I think organizations, a lot of the time, not all the time, are very busy trying to create everything from scratch, when there's so much good stuff out there that can be packaged up, delivered, put together in a way that is really meaningful, really good, really high quality, and access to people you would never get access to in your own organization. But that stuff gets forgotten. We try and kind of create something ourselves instead, which, to be honest, is probably not going to be as good. No. And is going to be more timely, more expensive, all those other things as well. So
I mean, that's a really good point. There's a whole bunch of things around creating. It is time consuming. It is expensive. You're not necessarily going to get the very best in the field coming in when you're creating those experiences. So why do you think people default to that versus curation? Because you think the world we live in, everything's so easy to find. Why is the default the difficult option, do you think? Because I think it's because that's what's always been, same as the whole, it's what's always been done. And I feel like there's maybe this thing in a learning team or for learning professionals of being like, well, if I didn't create it, what's my value? And I think we need to rethink the role of learning professionals in that
in that sense, and that includes curation as one of their key core skills, and that is valued and that is seen as being an important thing of what they do, rather than a lesser version of what they have historically done, which is more creation or learning design.
Yeah, really interesting. So this perception that, hey, my value is in my ability to create this stuff from scratch. And if I'm not doing that, if I'm just, going on Google and finding things, then I'm a less valuable professional. Yeah. I'm adding less. And there's a bit of maybe a mindset shift required around maybe that's not the case. And curation is a viable option.
Yeah.
And so let's say I am someone, in an organization. I've just listened to what you've just said and thought, actually, that makes perfect sense. Why am I spending all this time making all these things from scratch? What do you think are some of the initial questions to consider around, is curation the right path to go down versus creation? Or do you think there's almost like a little decision tree a person can go down to choose the right option for them?
Yeah, I think first of all I think part of it comes down to, what are you learning? What are you consuming? What are you listening to? How are you cataloging and curating that? And I think building that skill is something you can absolutely start at home, like with yourself. And if I was being bold and more controversial or provocative, I'd say that if you're not learning as a learning professional, you maybe need to think about doing something different, because if you're not just immersing yourself in learning what is happening, what's going on in the world and outside of the very kind of narrow learning kind of field, then you're going to be missing some of the best bits that you can be bringing into your organization. So I think there's that part. And I think then the sort of places to start would be just start with some of the big stuff, start with some of the big podcasts, start with some of the things, the Brene Brown ones, Esther Perel to maybe to an extent as well. Some of there's a number of other kind of good kind of work related ones, but it depends on what the topic is as well. And start to think about, all right, okay, well, how can I just build this into as a supplement to something I've created, as pre-reading, as post-reading, as something for people to listen to, consume, watch, etc. TED Talks obviously is probably the easy, one of the easiest examples of ways of starting to curate things. And then start to think about how to kind of build those into your existing content. And then, well, what if you were to create a whole curriculum from that? No, not saying that that's going to completely replace everything else that you're doing, but how would you maybe create a curriculum around curated content, for example? Because it means people can just dip in and out at different times. It's a bit more immersive. People can talk about it. There's all sorts of fun things you can do with it as well.
Yeah, cool. So it sounds like, initially, if we're kind of interested in this concept, dip your toes in. It doesn't need to be a completely throwing out what you're doing at the moment and replacing it. But we can supplement what we're doing already with some curated content and maybe challenging ourselves to go, hey, if I've got this new thing that I want to build skills around, how could I curate a complete experience around this instead of creating it, and challenging ourselves to do that? I do like your thought-provoking statement there as well around, hey, if you're in this profession and you're not learning, isn't something you're doing day in, day out, question a little bit about, is this the right field for you? You mentioned as well, once we do start, curating, we may be looking at like a little completed curriculum. There's other fun things we can do, I guess, to bring the curated content to life. Can you talk a little bit more about some of those things that someone might look to do?
Yep. So a couple of things that I've done recently on programs, or have built into programs, which is going to happen, as part of the program that's launched. One of them is actually giving people the curated content to read before a session, and then actually the first part of the session is discussing that. And in one that I've run recently, which actually is going to happen in a couple of days' time, the conversation part, I've given them something that, it's not so out there that it's kind of wrong or awful, would be really damaging if someone did, but it's probably not, I don't know, it's not super helpful advice, or it's got a bit of a different sort of slant to it. So I gave them that along with a couple of other examples, like, hey, read these 3 things, or ones to listen to, listen to this one and read these 2, or whatever it is. And then when we come back together, discuss it and just start to think about what does make that one good, what makes these ones good and that one not so good. What do I agree with these things? Because you want to kind of teach the ability to think critically. And I think a lot of our content in programs kind of dawned on me recently. I was like, oh, we only teach good stuff the right way. And again, there's a line, and there's some stuff you just wouldn't want to kind of touch or whatever. Obviously there's lots of caveats around that, but actually giving stuff that you're like, I don't fully agree with all that, but I can see why that is a position. So giving people stuff to talk about rather than just like, here's all the things you should do, I think is really useful as well. So there's some kind of discussion groups and things around that. And then the easiest one is probably something like a book club. And I'm running a book club as part of a program, which that bit launches later in the year, which I'm looking forward to, of course, for obvious reasons, because I have a podcast about books. But also, I know other people. Someone was telling me recently that at an organisation, I can't remember if it's somewhere they worked with or whatever, but they actually had like a book club, but for podcasts. So you would listen to a podcast, and then the group would get together and have a discussion about what they learned and their kind of the ideas they took away or what they've tried, that type of stuff as well. So that's where, again, you can start to build those kind of more critical thinking skills as well, which I think is also something that comes from practicing the art of curation, is starting to work out what is good and what is not good content, because curation is not just finding stuff and sticking it in something. It is finding stuff, assessing it, and then deciding where and when and all those things.
Yeah.
And that's probably not going to happen. You're probably not going to curate the stuff as soon as you find it, or when you find it, it's not going to be like, oh, great, I can use this tomorrow or today or whatever. So you also need to think about your way of, I suppose, your kind of knowledge management around cataloging that stuff, so that when you do need it, when you're like, oh, now I'm doing the feedback module or whatever it is, you can then be like, oh, let me pull out my list of useful, interesting things I've found about feedback.
Super interesting. It is. There's a couple of points I really like. I'm going to rewind a couple of points back to. It sounds like one of the ways to make this curation impactful is you find the stuff, you share it, and then instead of the sessions then being, hey, this is the first time we're talking about this topic, we're actually then getting into the nuances, which I quite like. But the thing I liked what you said is there's not necessarily just one way to do everything, and actually presenting people with a few different options is a useful way to stimulate discussion, explore the different shades of grey on a topic, rather than just going, black or white. So I really like this concept of sharing different things. So could you talk a little bit more about that? What are some of the things you look for when you're wanting to present contrasting opinions? Are you looking for polar opposites? Is there something else you're doing to try and stimulate that discussion through careful curation?
Yeah. So and a recent example, which I can actually give examples on, which is probably going to be easier than making one up, is feedback. So designed a feedback module as part of a People Leaders Academy program that we're launched recently and is kind of ongoing for the next few months. And there's a feedback module in there, as you'd probably expect. So one of the things, or 3 articles I've given them to read, or like I said, 1 video and 2 articles. One of them was was the Brene Brown engaged feedback checklist, which I really like some of the language in there. Some people don't. So again, that's one that the concepts are good, but the language might put people off. So again, you can get them to think about, well, what bit offends you and what would you maybe use instead? Or is it just the language that doesn't work, or is it the principles? You actually get them to think about that level of nuance. Oh, actually, if it was that word, I'd like to use it. Great. Okay, well, let's have that conversation. The other one is the radical candor model, which again is pretty popular to use in organizations around feedback. And then the third one is a Marcus Buckingham short video where he talks about, he doesn't actually think feedback's very good or helpful. Now he is purposely being provocative as well, because when you kind of get deeper into his stuff, he kind of does, but not in the way that it's done in organizations. But he talks about, he's got this really good kind of vox pop, I guess, or thing where he talks about most feedback is to make you more like me. So if I give you feedback, particularly on something that's more of a kind of a non-technical thing, like it's not a right or wrong, like if you don't click this, this won't happen type thing. Is it presentation skills or something like that? If I give you feedback on your presentation skills, it's probably to make you do something more like I would do it. And I just think that's, that's pretty interesting kind of perspective. But I know other people who are like, no, that's rubbish. Like that's not what feedback is at all. And then he also talks about how feedback he thinks is generally not helpful, and we should actually think about giving people positive affirmations for the stuff they're good at in kind of instead. So again, there's like some stuff in there that is kind of good, some stuff in there that's kind of questionable, or that some people find questionable. So again, it's it's interesting.
It sounds like the stuff has got all the things you talk about there. They've got clear points of view. They may be doing things that are slightly different to how people might normally approach it. So it creates room for dialogue and conversation. So people might not use these words. They might have a strong aversion to these words. They might see it and it might be interesting. And that then creates the interesting conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, this is not the feedback sandwich. Like, I think that's a lot of the a lot of the content certainly things I've seen previously, and this isn't, in everywhere or every organization, a conversation about feedback would be like, here's a model to use, rather than actually, what do you believe about feedback? Like, what do you think is true? Like, what's your experience been? All of that type of stuff. There is actually quite a lot sort of further down, especially if you kind of read more about it. It's like, oh, actually, yeah, that's really interesting. What about that? What about that? That's the kind of stuff we're getting into, rather than just, here's what do you believe, rather than what do I just tick off? Like, what's the checklist type thing?
Yes, you're kind of having conversations at the deeper level. What are your beliefs and values around feedback? Because I think ultimately unpacking some of that, then if there is a model,
then you can move. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also then people can start to imagine how they would use that, because they're like, oh, if I believe this, then this is how I would use that. Whereas the person next to you, in equally valid way, might be like, oh, well, I believe this, and I've had that challenge slightly, so now I would use the model in this way, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And much more meaningful conversations. And again, it's the nuance. It's not just looking at these topics at a surface level. And I guess if we go back to that curation piece, what the curation is, we don't need to come up with all these different ideas. I don't need to be the person generating, is it this model? Is it that model? I don't need to come up with all these new things. This all exists. People have these great stuff already out there. Yeah. If I'm just picking the stuff, presenting it and packaging it in a certain way, and then creating that right environment for people to talk about it. That's very powerful. So picking up the conversation, one of the things I think you mentioned is then it becomes a skill that, if we're in the learning space, be it P&C capacity or in a proper, a full-time learning role, curation then becomes a bit of a skill. So you've already mentioned a couple of things like picking the right types of articles, like the knowledge management piece. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me a little bit more about how I might go about building this skill? So let's say, look, again, I'm interested in this. I think I can see the value of curation. I generally am someone that reads a lot. Yeah. What can I do to kind of build this skill of curation out? What do I need to be focusing on?
Yeah. So I think if you're already someone who's listening to some stuff, subscribe to some decent newslettery type things, following a few interesting people on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever your kind of platform of choice is, so YouTube and stuff. First of all, would actually probably be to think about, right, how are you cataloging all of that? And this is something I actually need to get better at. And I'm actually reading the book Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte at the moment, which is all about this. Apparently the book is longer than it needs to be, which I'm not looking forward to, but it's all about kind of categorizing your content. And I do have a way of doing this, but I'm just not super disciplined in putting the stuff in there. So I've got a Trello board. There's many different ways you could do this. Notion boards, Asana, all of that type of stuff. But I'm currently using a Trello board, and each of my columns is a category. So using the same example, feedback. So I've got a column called feedback, and there's cards underneath which all relate to feedback topics. And it's a mixture of videos, articles, and every so often I'll go through, usually at the end of the year or beginning of the year, I'll have a look through that resources kind of board that I've got set up and filter out stuff that either is redundant or it's very time specific and now is kind of less relevant or whatever. But it means that when I go to deliver or design something on a particular topic, I can go to my board and be like, oh, that thing that I found 18 months ago that I was never going to remember, here it is there. So that I think is the critical bit that's missing. So if you're already kind of taking stuff in, it's more than building the discipline and the muscle around how am I now collating that? And you don't need to remember it's there, because once it's there, once you've catalogued it in your system, it's done, it's there. And that might be the thing you want to find is, and that's the thing I quite like about Asana, and Notion would be very good for this as well. And Trello as well, obviously, that's what I use. So the thing I like about that is that you can upload multiple different types of mediums. So it might be a photo or a highlight I've taken in a book that I take a photo of and upload there. A quote I see on LinkedIn, or a post I see that I can either take the link of the post if it's something chunky, or if it's just a screen print, I can add that and put that onto a card, or obviously links to articles and things like that as well. Another tip I would say is PDFing articles, because sometimes links change, or the kind of that stuff becomes retired or whatever. So I will usually add a link to the article just so I've got it, but then also PDF the article and just add that PDF onto the board or onto the card as well to make sure I've got that for future.
That's some super cool stuff there. And so if I get really granular, let's say you're having your cup of tea, cup of coffee, drink of choice in the morning, you're reading
a
stuff.
Matcha. Thank you.
What's that? Sorry?
A matcha.
A matcha. That's your drink. Yeah.
My drink of choice.
You're having your matcha. you're reading some stuff online, you come across something you really like. How do you talk to me about the granular process of like taking that and moving it to your knowledge management system in your Trello?
So the thing that is usually the thing for me is if I'll open, and I do this because I collate stuff for another podcast and newsletter that I'm involved with as well. So this is I've got a bit of a better system for that one, but it's what I'm using for this as well, is that I will open it. So if I read it on my computer, or for example, I'll move that or copy it because I use all my Apple things, so it all connects. So I just will open it then on my phone, in my browser, on my Chrome app. And then later in the week, or at some point in the week, I will go back through, look at all my open tabs on the Chrome app. Don't ask me what number I'm up to at the moment because it's quite frightening. And I'll then just like populate and just be like, oh, that one's going there, that one's going there, that one's going there. And kind of it's more of the edit happens then, because sometimes I'll then read stuff, be like, oh, actually that's not so good, or that's when you kind of do a bit more filtering, a bit more editing. But at first it's more like, oh cool, that looks interesting, I'll open that, or oh, I have read that one, I'm going to open that and put that there. The thing I need to get particularly better at, and that's pretty good, I'm pretty good at doing that with articles and things. The thing I'm less good at doing it with is podcasts and podcast episodes. So that's what I need to just make sure I go back and kind of catalog those a little bit better as well.
That's awesome. So it almost sounds like you've got a workflow here. You've got coming across, like you're reading lots, and then some things will be like, this is kind of cool. So here, this goes to the next part of the workflow. And then there's another part, which is like, okay, there's lots of cool things. Let me, with fresh eyes, look at this again and go, is it actually new, different, novel, adding value, whatever the criteria are. And then it makes it to the board. And even then it sounds like there's a final part of the board where you're going through and going, okay, has this stood the test of time? Is this still valuable?
Yeah. That's probably more the every so often bit, rather than the kind of weekly or monthly type thing.
And then this is obviously, it sounds like part of this is you're reading widely across a bunch of different topics, and that way you've got these different columns constantly being populated. You're not just looking for stuff at a moment in time. This is the topic I'm interested in. It's kind of broadly canvassing these things.
Yeah, I mean, obviously at some point you're like, oh, right, I need to actually go a bit deeper into this topic because I'm working on it at the moment. But if you've got a couple of things to sort of set you off or set you down a particular couple of rabbit holes, then that to me is a really good outcome of this.
Yeah, amazing. So can you give me some more pointers then around, because these things are working through a funnel, they're working through a process. So you're making some decisions around what's in and what's out. What generally for you goes, these are things that are worthwhile having in from a learning experience point of view? What are some of the key things you look for? Okay, this is going to make the cut.
Usually a couple of things. So either it's something like some new research that's actually got a bit of a kind of scientific base to it. I really like that stuff because people like that stuff. And particularly when you work with a lot of professional services type people, as I do, like there is like, where's the evidence? So that's always helpful.
Collect the evidence.
Yeah, exactly. And especially if that evidence goes against the things they may have been told before. I love that stuff. So that's good. So anything evidence-based, new papers, that type of thing is a pretty kind of good shoe-in as long as it looks legit. The other thing is something that a different industry is doing, or a company that isn't necessarily known for doing that thing are doing, that you think, oh, a different application. Like I love the stuff that's more of like a lateral, a different application of a thing in a different context. So that to me is really useful. And the example of that I had earlier this year, which I loved, or late last year even, is Duolingo, who is it's a platform and an app I really enjoy anyway, language learning app. They opened a tortilleria in, I want to say Pittsburgh, because I think that's where they're based, where you could go and speak Spanish, and you could go and use that experience of going to the tortilleria to practice your Spanish. And I just thought that was so good as a way of taking your kind of e-learning, which essentially is what Duolingo is, but like really good e-learning, and turning that into a real life experience where you can interact with others, make it a bit social, and practice in a safe space, especially something that always feels kind of awkward and clunky and when you're learning a new language.
Yeah. Cool. So it sounds like it's like these examples of edge cases, things that are different. There's like a level of novelty, goes against the grain. These are all immediate things that it sounds like you go, this goes into the board. It makes
and also I suppose the other thing would be something like learning tech type stuff. So new ways of delivering content, ideas, programs, etc., that go beyond getting people in a room or getting people on a Zoom or that kind of thing. Because I think that, again, is something that there's some huge gaps and opportunities in, and something that needs to kind of have a bit of a shake up as well. So anything like that, and even just stuff like little things, like I've got a post-it note in my office, in my actual office, not here, which is, it just says airline safety videos ? And that's all about thinking about e-learning and how I just think most e-learning is just absolutely horrible still. And if I could never have anything that has an e-learning in, I'd be a happy person. But something I was like, oh, actually, what is a fun version of e-learning that's more around the kind of compliance-y type stuff? And it's airline safety videos, and some of them do them really, really well, and they're almost like Hollywood type, productions.
Yeah,
Qantas is okay.
Yeah,
I mean, Qantas tend to go for the kind of heartstrings kind of one a little bit more, whereas like Southwest Airlines, for example, super fun, really engaging. They make it their own, and they kind of bring it to life in that way. It's not some awful experience of click through 29 times to then get to the end, fall on the floor, and sort of say you've done it type thing. None of that.
Eyes are just you're tearing up because of concentrating at the screen for so long. So there's some really cool stuff in here. Okay, so this sounds like the very initial part of the process is, let's get better at reading widely, categorizing what we're reading, having some kind of filtration process for like what's good and what's not. If we kind of then go, okay, how do we then curate I guess the part I'm interested in here is the experience. So I personally go, one of the benefits of building something is it's connected. It all makes sense in a sequence. You can design the flow. If you're creating stuff, that's not necessarily going to happen automatically. You've still got to give some thought to that. So how do you stitch things together? And by stitching, it might be, how do you sequence them? Stitching may even be like, what supplementary stuff do you create? So what's your advice around stitching it together to really curate the experience part of it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think that's the bit at the end. That's almost the contextualization of the curation. So you do the collation, I suppose, then you do the curation, and then you do the contextualization. So write that down, because that was good.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, it's recorded, so we're good.
Oh yeah, we got it. We're perfect. Lives forever. So I think, and that's the important bit as well. You can't just kind of spray the stuff out. And I think this is also that whole thing of, and you will absolutely have experienced this before, you learn better when you're teaching. And I think as learning people, or as leaders, or whatever your kind of role is, when you send something out and be like, hey, this is the thing I liked about this, or this is the thing that is relevant to this organization, this period of time, this group, whatever the context is, that's where you get to add the value. And that's where, if you're feeling like you haven't done enough as a learning person by curation, the contextualization bit, that's where you get to add the magic, and that's where you get to stitch it together. That's where you get to add the experience element to it. That is the book club, that is the podcast listening club, that is the learning channel, that every week on a Wednesday, there's a Wednesday wisdom or something like that. Oh, glad I chose Wednesday for that example.
I used to go every day of the week now and go, what's the one for Monday?
There's Wednesday wisdom, and at lunchtime on a Wednesday, you send something out for people to enjoy on the learning channel. That's more the comms kind of platform for that. So it's then just thinking about, how do you build this in so it's not just like a random spray out to your organization, your team, whatever your kind of your group is, but that it makes sense in the context of the stuff that's happening. Or it is just simply adding it in as pre or post work to existing programs or courses, if you want to kind of take a slightly more, how do you build it into a slightly more traditional model of, or current kind of model of learning.
And I guess that still means those skills around understanding the business context, the learning and development needs, the skills that the business needs for the future. These are still really all relevant. And in fact, you're probably giving yourself more time and energy to ramp those things up, because you're not spending all that time creating new stuff.
This is very true.
Which is pretty neat. And so we kind of now get to the point where we're stitching things together. We've curated the experience. What are some of the other things you would say I can then do to embed this as a way of my way of working? Like, are there other techniques
as a learning? So as a learning person, I think as a starting, so I think as a
learning person,
So I think as a starting point, it's putting the time in to do it. And I know it's really boring or whatever, but it's true. Like, if you're just waiting for this stuff to happen to you, unfortunately it's just not. So whether that is that, at the start of every day, half an hour, or just before lunch or after lunch or something like that. That's how you get sort of build yourself into the afternoon, and be really targeted with it. So if you know that there's 5 or 8 or 10 people that you know that put out really good quality content, Josh Bersin is one that I really like. Victor Dominello is another guy, not learning related actually at all, but he's a government minister. I can't remember exactly what his sort of full title is, because those government ministers have got super long titles, but he's in New South Wales, and he shares a lot of stuff around digitization in government sort of services and stuff as well. And I just find his stuff really interesting, not from a learning perspective, but just thinking about, what should we be thinking about in terms of improving user experiences? Anyway, so stuff like that. So find your people that you follow, have a list of them, and maybe once a day go and look at 1 or 2 of those and just see, have they put anything out this week, this month, or whatever, depending on, maybe don't look at the same people every day, but go and see each day, tick a couple off the list or work down your list and just see who's put something out in the last few days. Read it. Is it good? Is it not good? Where does it send you to? So follow a couple of the links, spend, I don't know, 20 minutes,
the rabbit
half an
hole.
hour.
Go down the rabbit hole.
Exactly. Go down a couple of rabbit holes. Yeah, exactly. Go down a couple of rabbit holes, 15 minutes, whatever it is, and do that. Same with books you're reading as well. If you're reading a book at the moment and it references a paper, another author, another book, whatever it is, again, put some time in your diary, go and look that up. So in your half an hour of learning curation time a day, put in your diary for the next day, look up this thing that I read about in this particular book or article, whatever as well. And I think over time you then start, if you did that even 3 times a week, you're going to pretty quickly build up a pretty good library of stuff that then you can filter and work through and things as well. And then maybe it's the end of the week, if you do a sort of similar thing where you open a load of stuff, at the end of the week you put an hour in and you work through and kind of document that in your whatever your knowledge management system is for that.
I like to say, you've got to put the time and effort in. You've got to be
certainly at first when you're building the muscle. I think after a while that becomes after a while that just becomes the way you work and kind of operate. But certainly at first, it definitely requires some attention, intention, and a bit of discipline and system around it as well.
That's awesome. And so the next question I've got for you is, there might be topics that you then are personally less interested in. So let's say I'm in an organization and doing this stuff, and all of a sudden there's a topic that I haven't. Let's say it's finance. I've got no interest in finance, but I know I've got to build stuff around that. Any suggestions you've got there for topics you're not interested in, but you still want to curate? How do you? Because I imagine it's way easier when you're interested in a topic. You just go down.
Of course, it's a good point.
Fun.
Yeah.
But what if you don't understand the technical aspect of the topic as much? What are some of the things you can do in that instance where you're not necessarily domain expertise or just not interested?
And I think the first one I'd be thinking about in any of those situations is find someone who is, and ask them, even if you ask them either to co-curate with you or something, or if they've got a list of, hey, who are the top few people that you follow in this area that I should go and look at their stuff if I've got to learn some more about this. That's going to be the easiest way, rather than just completely starting from scratch, because then you've got quite a big learning curve around who is it actually even worth listening to.
Who's actually spouting rubbish and good stuff.
And look, that's not absolute either. Of course, some people are going to think this person is and that person's not, and others will think the exact opposite. So even just asking a couple of different people, hey, I need to learn something about this topic, who's worth talking to or listening to or watching or whatever. And then, just getting on Google, I suppose, or getting on LinkedIn, or getting on the TED kind of library. YouTube is a really good starting point for most things as well. Just being like, right, what can I learn? And again, just follow those rabbit holes. And you probably just want to follow more threads in those things, because you want to go a bit wider to then kind of bring it back in.
Amazing. And so it just sounds like, if you're in this space, and it goes back to the point you were talking about earlier, you just need to be passionate about learning new stuff, whether it's whether it's stuff that's right in your sweet spot or not, having that interest in just learning and exploring new things.
And it's just going to make you, and I just think this sort of stuff is the thing that makes you so much of a better asset to your organization, your learning team, and to the leaders you're working with as well. So if you can bring different perspectives, different kind of commercial views and stuff like that as well, and when your leaders are, can you run a thing on the feedback sandwich, you can be like, actually that's no longer actually a good way of doing feedback. In fact, we in the sessions I run, we do a whole ritualistic putting the feedback sandwich in the bin because it's really not what we want to do. So then you can actually help your leaders understand what's good, what's not good, because that's what they're looking at you for, is to bring the best of what is currently the ways of doing things, the way, whatever the topic is, rather than just what they were taught 20 years ago, or what they heard somewhere once, kind of thing. So
it's not. I have equally. I'm equally disgusted by the feedback sandwich. So I'm on the same page.
Yeah.
So we've obviously talked a lot about curation, and I think there's some brilliant, practical techniques. I like the process that that you go through, and I think there's lots to take away there. There's obviously a lot of value in this. When we talked about the value of it, when do we create then? So, is creating even before that question is creation even relevant or necessary? And if so, when do we create?
Yeah, I think and I think there is still currently. I still think there is absolutely room for creation. The things I think creation is still really good for is probably more some of the technical type stuff that is internal, because inherently it's going to be harder to find that content to the same level, or it's going to be branded by some other competitor potentially, or something like that. It's going to be a bit awkward. So when it's something more technical, I think that's where currently creation is probably slightly more relevant. Again, some industries have got really good bodies or I suppose associations which provide good stuff. So again, maybe that's where you can be leveraging that more, and then to give you time to then create different stuff rather than just creating something that someone else has done and it's the same thing that your people are all members of anyway. Like why would we do that? So there's that part.
The classic rebuilding the wheel, hey, just like making
I think so as well. And I think at the moment the gap on creation, or the need for creation, is actually recreation, which is kind of the work I do around that, reimagining how that stuff is delivered. Like, that's where we should be spending the time, thinking about how do we deliver this stuff? How do we actually help people learn, rather than just putting together more and more slide packs? Because that and also that is not creation. So
sorry everyone.
Sorry, not sorry. Like if that's what we're thinking about creation, and again we're kind of there's something missing there as well. So really thinking about creation from that whole kind of experience perspective, and thinking about what do we want people to feel as a result of this, not just what can we measure, because again there's I mean that's a whole other conversation in itself, the measurement piece. So
it is, yes.
Yeah.
A very interesting one as well. So let's fast forward then a bit into the future, because I guess one of the things, the premises of the curation, which you talked about at the beginning, is there's tons of good stuff out there. Yep. Where do you see the future with this? I mean, we're like sometimes you can feel like you're swimming and drowning in stuff. We do have legitimately access to learn anything. What do you see as the future from that side of things, in terms of how stuff's produced, what's produced?
Yep.
Do you see it just a case? Is it more and more volume? Is it just going to be stuff added on? Is there going to be something else that happens? What's your take on the landscape we're going to be curating from?
Well, I think it's actually going to be, the question is more around who will be doing the curation. And I think the future is probably that the curation will be done for us. At the moment, I think there still needs to be quite a bit of human interaction there, but I don't think it'll be long. So whilst, I wouldn't suggest anyone sort of now pegs their whole career on being a learning curator, because I think in 3 to 5 years, we'll get much better AI type stuff that learns that stuff. Like even at the moment, I work with a couple of clients who use the equivalent of like LinkedIn Learning and one of the other ones anyway, that's that kind of platform where there's loads of different content available on there that they have subscriptions to. But again, there's so much on there, and so much of it isn't great. So, and LinkedIn Learning and all these other ones don't have great curation built into it either. So I think that will be the next bit, is that the AI within those, you'll be able to add in or answer a couple of questions, or put in some details or something, and it will give you your curriculum based on the skills and stuff. And actually maybe aligning that to your organization's curriculum or something for your level. I think that's where I think we're probably not that far away from. It's still probably a couple of years, but the technology is not that far off. If you think about what happens in the background of something like Netflix, Spotify, and those types of things, it's not that far away. And at the moment, the learning tech has a long way to kind of catching up on that stuff.
Very cool. I at least like the some parts of that vision where you're kind of going on and it's you're just getting fed the best of the best stuff.
Yeah. And also the fact that, being able to bring in multiple sources, I think is then the next kind of layer to that as well, that it does bring in YouTube stuff or certain channels or something like that you plug into it. It does bring in podcasts, you plug it into Spotify or something, rather than just what is on LinkedIn Learning, for example.
Yes, then you're just limited to that, actually. And a lot of, again, what's resonating with me is you're talking about the very beginning part is it's going broad and going down the rabbit hole. So that means you're just going wherever, your mind and interest takes you. You're not just limited to, hey, what's on this one channel.
100%.
So good curation breadth is super important. So
absolutely. And looking for unexpected. And this thing, and looking for unexpected stuff as well. Someone who does this really well, not in the learning space, but someone I really admire for her curation and being able to bring different things together in the work that she does is Madeline Dorr, who's a writer. She wrote the book I Didn't Do the Thing Today, which is like my favorite title of a book ever still. And the sources and the inspiration and stuff she brings into that and her writing generally, but also her book is just, it's so broad. And I just, I envy her brain.
Yeah. It's, I think it is like this whole looking for different sources. And I think this is where you mentioned, if you're pegging your career and being a learning curator, yes, there's technology there, but I think having that skill of identifying where are the unusual sources and differences and things that are happening, that new emerging stuff, it's still going to be a worthwhile skill to build and flex.
And just knowing that not everything, and also just knowing that not everything on HBR is worth it. Like, there's some great stuff on Harvard Business Review, and there's stuff that I share all the time from there. But there's some trash on there as well. So awesome stuff that just feels really out of date still, and stuff that is out of date because it was written in 2006 or in the dark ages. So.
The dark ages,
yeah.
Awesome. And so moving on then from the learning curation piece, I guess I'm going back full circle more to exploring a bit more about you. You're obviously very passionate in this topic. What's next for you from a learning curation point of view? How are you planning on continuing to build your own skills, refine your own skills? You talked a little bit about the knowledge management piece. What else is in store for you from a learning curation point of view personally?
For me, it's still kind of this constant quest of putting myself through different learning experiences to think about how do I kind of bring those in as well that aren't just another, well, some of them are kind of coursey kind of related, but that isn't just another, I don't know, like leadership type thing. So something like improv that, we're both improv people. So things like that. So thinking about how do I kind of bring other experiences in, even like this stuff around going out into nature and doing kind of like offline offsites, that type of stuff, like that type of thing. And actually just thinking about that experience element, because I think still a lot of the learning conversation we're having is very limited to bringing people together, sitting them in the office, doing something together, like that kind of stuff. And I just think I really want to kind of bust out of that a lot more over the next kind of year or whatever. Maybe not for everything. Again, it's not everything. Was it if you've only got a hammer, everything's a nail? Not to that extent, but just thinking about, right, how can we really kind of rethink this? And for me, the big thing, kind of want to get to the stage of is the learning, particularly like a leadership, because it's generally the kind of non-technical stuff that I focus on, not exclusively, but is the leadership learning experience that people have is not just content. It is experiential, and it is different, and it is challenging, and it is stuff that makes people uncomfortable, and it isn't just someone being talked to, and it isn't just ideas, it's conversation, it's experience, it's discussion, it's disagreement as well. And it is not just things you'd expect to see on a curriculum.
Yeah. I mean, even when I just think to my own experiences, I often will say this: if you want to build your leadership skills, go coach a junior sports team, because it is everything you need to build gets tested there. How do you motivate people? How do you communicate?
Exactly,
clearly?
that type of stuff. Yeah.
And you've got a bunch of people that do not care what you're saying. So you've got one of the hardest audiences, which is do not want to listen to you. So
and you can just never replicate that in a classroom. And I think that's the stuff, especially when we want to build more adaptive leaders who aren't just trying to solve everything with another framework or another kind of whatever. Like, we need to put people in inherently complex situations where they are out of their skill set and out of their depth improv is another one. It's probably like a softer kind of version of it as well. Absolutely. I think that's a great example, like that kind of coaching a junior kind of sports in some way. Yeah, when there's other versions of that as well.
There's so many different.
You don't have to be a sports person to, because I know that's over egged quite a lot as well, this sports stuff. But yeah.
But always even go with the sports. The experience, because you're dealing with parents as well. So you've got so many. Your
stakeholder management is high.
Stakeholder management. There is the motion of volatility. You've got match day. There's so many good variables there. But I think there are,
and celebration as well. Which again is the thing that and debriefing and celebrating and reviewing and all the rest, which teams are generally horrible at.
They are. So lots of good opportunities there to. I think look at other spaces, and I think you've talked about this as well. It's not just look at other spaces and see how they're doing it. And then the last question I have got for you is, and a flip of the question we started with, which was a recent highlight. What are you most looking forward to in the next couple of weeks, months coming ahead? Personally, work-wise, anything at all? You can.
Next couple of months. Well, I've got some fun things on. I've got some kind of fun bits and pieces like work-wise that I'm working on, kind of big kind of curriculum redesigns, which I'm excited about. And one technical one as well, which is a complete redesign of some technical content for accountants, which is my original kind of what I started my career as. So I'm always, I don't know, it's not something I want to spend all my time doing is kind of accounting technical content, but I get quite a satisfaction of like turning technical content into something a bit more fun. So anyway, but also from a non-work perspective, but also kind of getting out and getting back to living again, off to South Korea for a little bit of hiking and stuff in about 5 weeks. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Love the conversation, and I loved going really much deeper into this aspect of curation. I think there's lots of interesting.
Yeah, thank you. No, great questions. Thank you.
No problem at all. I am going to now revisit my own curation practices, which are nowhere near as structured, as disciplined as yours. I've got some work to do.
We're a curation machine by the end of the year. Yeah,
I will be. That's great to chat, Steph, and I'm looking forward to hopefully. Well, we didn't have any
still go for dinner.
Yes, disputes, so we can still have dinner. We made it.
Yes, dinner and jams next week. That's what we'll do.
Yes, dinner and jam. Sounds like we're going to have a big jar of jam that we're going to be.
Well, we might do, and then we'll go to improv. So.
Thanks so much, Steph. Take care.
Cool. Thanks, Viren.
See ya.